Welcome to another episode of Variologies. I'm Dan Calcanio.
And I'm Noah.
And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to take a break from theology this episode, and we're going to talk about politics or political philosophy. I think an interesting thing we can do with this podcast is not only talk about theology, which interests us, but talk about perhaps, obviously, I think we're going to bring a bit of our faith and Christian perspective into our discussion of politics and political philosophy. I think that we, as Christians and as people of faith, we will bring that into our political understanding and our political viewpoints, and so that's kind of what I wanted for us to talk about today. What role does morality have in politics or in political philosophy? So just before we begin, we do want you to subscribe if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts and or however else you listen to podcasts. And if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe. Click on the thumbs up button, and also leave a comment. Interacting, that's how the podcast gets out there, right? Is for people to interact in some way or to share it with others. So we would appreciate that. So I think for this episode, the best way we can go about it is for people to get to know us a little better when it comes to our viewpoints. I think we're going to find that we agree on a few things politically and in terms of political philosophy, and we might disagree on other things. So why don't you just maybe talk about a little bit of your history of your political viewpoints and where you find yourself today.
Yeah. Well, certainly coming from a Christian family where, everyone voted conservative and stuff like that. I think I was just sort of, when I didn't think of it, that's kind of what I would tend towards. And then I remember you got pretty into libertarianism, especially around I think it was probably 2008 Ron Paul's first go at it. Or was it 2012?
It was the 12.
It was the 2012. Yeah. And I mean, I was only how old 14, would I have been? Yeah, 14 or something like that. So I mean, but that was really my only exposure to actual political thought or philosophy or anything like that. So I found that pretty appealing. And I certainly do sympathize with a lot of libertarianism even now, especially economically. I think that's the way to go. But over the last couple of years, I have found myself on the social side being more I think there is certainly a place, even a need for virtue and morality in politics and how we order society and in legislation and stuff like that. So I'm sure that's probably when we get into a discussion later, that's probably the foremost place we'll have some disagreements, but it'll be a good discussion wherever we go.
You actually might be surprised to find out areas of agreement in that area. Perhaps the area of disagreement will be what role does the government have in that.
Right.
So that's what we can talk about. So similar to you, growing up in your dad's family, right?
Yeah.
My parents and my siblings would always vote conservative and just generally be conservative in terms of political viewpoint. I think a lot of people, a lot of Christians vote conservative and have conservative, an identity that way because of the abortion issue or of gay marriage or something like that.
Right,
so those issues sort of inform and because there aren't any other parties that really any other major parties that would do policy in favor of those viewpoints of pro-life and against gay marriage, that Christians generally just tend to vote conservative, right?
Right.
So I didn't really give any thought to it. For me though, living through 9/11 was I look back at that as being a huge part of an event in my life that, looking back now, led me down a path. So I was in grade 11, I think I was in 2001, and I was at school. I was in high school and heard about the planes crashing into the World Trade Center and stuff, and then came home and watched CNN for the whole rest of the day, and I was just completely enthralled. And I've always been interested in those events because it was such an incredibly mind-blowing image of seeing those planes, the plane crashing into the World Trade Center and then them coming down and everything. So I've always been interested in that. And then years later, probably around 2010, 2009 or 10, something like that, I got into Alex Jones.
That's right? Amazing.
Because, I've always thought of conspiracy theories or, like people who believe in like aliens or UFOs or whatever. I don't believe in that stuff, but I find it interesting. Like when I was a kid in like the late 90s, I would watch the X-Files, for example. Okay. All right. So I've always been sort of interested in conspiracy theories and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so Alex Jones is this he's
the king of conspiracy theories.
Very entertaining radio host who does conspiracy theories and stuff like that, right? And so, but the thing about him was he would have Ron Paul on the show a lot.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Because Alex Jones is sort of like a libertarian type guy, like an American patriot, right? Like, and if you're an American patriot, then you probably should believe in limited government, that sort of thing.
Right.
So Ron Paul would go on there often to talk about politics and stuff. And then so I found out about Ron Paul and about how he ran for president in 2008 and that he was going to be running again. He was a congressman and from Texas, which is also where Alex Jones is from. So there's probably that connection there too. Mm-hmm. And through that campaign, the 2012 campaign, so this must have been in 2011 when it was starting, I discovered John Stossel. And I remember John Stossel from 2020. Like, he used to be on the show 2020 every Friday night. My family would watch it, and I was just a kid, and I always thought it was mostly boring. But I remembered this mustached guy who was on 2020. And so when I found out he was on Fox News, or whatever, and he had a show, and he would talk about Ron Paul and libertarian issues and Ayn Rand and all these people, I thought it was interesting. So I got into it. And it's really John Stossel who put all of the libertarian issues in a way that was easy to understand. And it just made sense to me. And so for anyone out there who doesn't know what libertarianism is, it's the idea that you should have as limited government as possible, basically. Mm-hmm. People should be free to live their lives the way they want to, as long as they don't harm or interfere in other people's lives. The guiding principle is two guiding principles of libertarianism. One is private property, that the first private property is yourself, that you don't belong to anyone else, but you also get to own, like fully own, the product of yourself. Whether that is the money that you earn at a job or whatever, you get to fully own that. Mm-hmm. Nobody else has any, claim to it. But or if you exchange your products or services with somebody else, labor. Or your labor, and then you get to fully own what you exchange, and then that goes with the second principle, which is the non-aggression principle, which is you don't interfere in other people's lives. So everybody has a right to their life. So I don't interfere in your life. That's your life. I don't get to take your life. That's called murder, right?
Right.
And this is going to get into our discussion for today. I don't get to take your property because that's called theft, right? I don't get to take your labor because that's called slavery. Right? And these are things that everybody in Western society and civilized society agrees with, right?
For sure, yeah.
Everybody believes in that murder is wrong and that theft is wrong and that slavery is wrong. But libertarians say, okay, good, I'm glad people acknowledge that those are wrong things. So how come we give the government a pass on it? How come they're allowed to do it? What makes them special? So to me, that's a great argument because they're just people like us. They're not different. Just because we say that they're allowed to do these things doesn't make it any less wrong.
That's right.
It's still wrong. So in fact, the logic of it actually led me to becoming an anarchist in terms of a libertarian anarchist, if you will. It's actually called an anarcho-capitalist because libertarianism, freedom, will result in a market society. Because if you just leave people alone, they're going to interact with each other and exchange with each other. Mm-hmm. And that's a market. So capitalism in its purest form is libertarian, is the idea of people just left alone to exchange with one another, and you can't force me to do things, But if we voluntarily, that's another word that's used to describe this viewpoint, voluntarism.
Yeah.
Right? You believe in nothing is done by force. So that's it in a nutshell. That I'm a libertarian anarchist, but I do see the value of traditional morality, such as marriage, such as family life, those sort of things. So I do believe that is and the value of believing in a higher power, in God, in having a purpose in terms of a moral purpose. Mm-hmm. And so that should be the foundation of society. Otherwise, we would have a chaotic society. So I do think that we should promote conservative values to a degree.
Right.
But I don't think the government should do anything about it, because the government would be forcing people to do it.
Yeah. That's one thing I always, something that kind of veered me away from like no government interference was the, you know, how a lot of people, especially like libertarians and like leftists will say this too, is you shouldn't legislate morality. Right. But I think all legislation is inherently legislating morality. Like you just said, we all believe murder is wrong, that's why it's illegal. We believe theft is wrong, so it's illegal. Slavery is wrong, so it's illegal. Yeah. So my question is, where is the right place to draw the line? Because obviously there is a point where government interference is too much, and we should reduce their power and their size and stuff like that. So that's probably where our common ground is. But I just think that there are things that might not necessarily harm you in the sense that they injure you or take your stuff, but that as a whole are harmful for, you know, our society and for our country, and that the government should protect its people from those things.
Okay.
And in doing so, uphold virtue in its citizens.
Right. An interesting thing that I think I've heard David Friedman say, who is actually the son of Milton Friedman, who's a famous economist who's now dead, but
I thought you said communist. I'm like,
no, economist.
Economist. Okay.
Yeah. He said that in an anarchist society, in a completely free market society without a central government, that doesn't mean there won't be rules. In fact, you might have more rules in an anarchist society, because the whole point is this, that you wouldn't have a monopoly on government. Government would become something that is offered by the market. And, or rather, to put it more accurately, the services of government, protection, right? Dealing with, you know, evildoers. I don't know how else to put it, right? People who murder, people who steal and rape and do all these things, right? You got to deal with that.
Right.
If you're going to have a society, you need to deal with that. And what else? Oh, like national defense, like defending your geographical land from outside people who want to come and kill you, right? So these services would still be needed in our society if we were to abolish the government, or at least the federal government. But what you would do is you would just have competing ways of dealing with those issues, and you know, maybe you and I would subscribe to one company who would protect our rights and protect our, you know, us, whereas, you know, a whole bunch of other people would. It's like having different internet service providers or cell phone providers, right? You have options, and you're not necessarily forced. You're not forced to use only one, right? And that's actually, I think, the way out of our current way we do government is to not abolish the government, but just to open up competition, like to have competition to it.
Yeah, I certainly agree. Like, especially like in Canada, obviously we have public health care and it's not good.
Right.
So it would be beneficial if you could, like, hey, if you have the money, go to this private hospital, this privite insurance provider, and giving even ways out of certain taxes if you're getting your stuff elsewhere.
Exactly.
But and I certainly agree with you on an economic level, but there's another sense where, so what you were just describing as, you know, a plurality of companies perhaps that you could entrust for, you know, legal services and protection of your rights, your freedom, and your dignity for that matter. So the thing is, like, the reason, even when I was more in that libertarian camp, the reason I could never fully make the hop into being an anarchist was, it just seems like it'd be getting rid of all these structures to functionally recreate them, right?
Right.
Because it's like we're getting, okay, so we get rid of the Canadian government. There eventually will be some sort of monopoly that takes its place. Because even if you look at like our markets right now, like Apple has functionally has a monopoly over. I mean, sure, there's Microsoft. Maybe that's not the best example, but but monopolies do exist in the marketplace where it's like, sure, you like, for example, like when we were getting set up, we have this adapter right now that our microphones are going through. You have to get that if you want to use Apple.
If I want to use Apple, but that's my choice, though, right?
I know, yeah. So,
sure. So like an interesting thing is the idea of a monopoly is in and of itself not immoral or bad if it is voluntarily chosen. Like if everybody chooses to use Apple as an example, and it becomes like a true monopoly, and there are literally no other computer companies, but everybody is choosing it, then who cares? What's the problem? Everybody's choosing it. But if there's a because there are people who are really against Apple, right?
Yeah.
And they wouldn't want to use it. Well, what if they were forced to use it? That wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be moral,
right?
So I guess that's the the topic of our episode is, where is the place of morality in society and in government? Like, to me, if we're going to talk about morality, then force is the definition of, again, things like enslavement and murder and assault and things like that. You're being forced to do things against your will that you don't want to do.
Yeah,
we agree that that's wrong. So why is it okay if the government does it? Again, to go back to that example we just gave, if you were not an Apple person, you didn't like Apple, it would be immoral to force you to use Apple, right?
Right.
Well, why is it different to force somebody to do something the government wants you to do, right? So that's the issue, right?
Yeah.
Why can't we have a society like, I like what you said, that if we were to abolish the Canadian government, we would just have to recreate those institutions in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay, but at least it would be moral, right? At least it wouldn't be by force, and it wouldn't be a monopoly. I don't think that we would get a monopoly the way it is now, right?
Yeah.
Because the way it is now is it's a forced monopoly. Like, I don't think there are any actual non-forced monopolies today. Can't think of any, but I mean, feel free to tell us if
I just think like it's one thing for like products and like things you're buying and selling, but like when it comes to like ordering society and rights and stuff like that, if you want to use that sort of language, it's like I think like what it would turn into is it would be like it would almost be a reversion to feudalism in some ways, because you'd have different companies in our case providing these services, and certain people would be this one, certain people would be with that one, and then some would be more powerful than others, and maybe functionally you don't have a choice which one you subscribe to, right? And then I think eventually that leads to monopoly.
Yeah, that's a fair anticipation or like fear to have of that, because we wouldn't want that, but that's the weird thing about that argument, though, is, and I mean that as kindly as possible.
Yeah.
is that, like, the weird thing about that argument is, if that is your fear, then why are you okay with the current reality?
Yeah.
I'd rather have freedom and have nobody, at least at the beginning, not forcing anyone. And then if it turns into that, then at least, we're no better off than we are now, right?
Yeah.
But it could be that people, well, see, the thing about companies and trying to get your business is they can't force you. Apple can't force you to use their computers and their products, right?
Yeah.
But they want to get you to use their products and services. So in the case of, I guess what you're saying is it's different because it's the idea of rights. Yeah. It's the idea of like protection and things like that. Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll touch on how an anarcho-capitalist society would work in another episode.
Sure.
Because there are libertarians, certainly a lot of libertarians, who wouldn't say, let's get rid of all of the government. Ayn Rand and the objectivists, they would say, we should have the government there for for laws, for the courts, and for national defense and things like that. It's called minarchism, right?
Yeah.
Minimal government. Right. Would you consider yourself a minarchist, or would you say that the government should be involved in things of personal matters like drug use and things like that? Where do you fall on that?
It's like I said, I think I tend towards libertarianism more in an economic sense and in more fiscally. But when it comes to social issues, I do think there is a place for I think it's part of their responsibilities, in fact, for the government to uphold virtue in their citizens. I think, if you look back to the Greeks, for example, their conception of liberty wasn't getting to do the most stuff you want to do. It was creating a life where you're where you have self-control and where you have virtue. And I think part of the responsibility of the government is to see that in its citizens. So, for example, on Twitter a few weeks ago, or it's probably a few months ago at this point, some of the accounts I was following were going back and forth on if pornography should be legal or illegal. And, a lot of more maybe mainstream conservatives and libertarians were saying, of course it should be. It's a freedom of expression issue. Right. But a lot of the more, I don't know, maybe reactionary accounts I follow were saying, of course it shouldn't be. Look at what the effects of it are. Look at how it, look at, for example, the way the porn industry, they subjugate women, and they they're involved in human trafficking to an extent. And look at the way it affects people's brains and their minds. It's more addictive than, say, cocaine, for example.
The dopamine hit.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's and this is doing bad things to families. It's doing bad things to people. They're getting addicted to it, and so on one, I remember in maybe in high school and early college, I'd be content to say, it's their choice. They should be allowed to make a choice. But it's look at the way it's impacting our society on so many different levels, the way that people can just access this and do that. And I think there's similar principles for other things. I just think that's probably one of the best examples of it.
So do you think that so I would say the problem with that is having the government try to regulate things like pornography or just anything that we find objectionable or perhaps harmful on a societal or familial level is, what is the principle at play there? How do you because the principle of libertarianism is that if it's done between voluntary consenting adults and no force is being because the idea of human trafficking and stuff like that, that's a whole other issue.
That is for sure
horribly immoral and should be condemned for sure. But what people do in private, in a sense, is their business, right? I guess that's the whole idea. Is society has a role to play, but it doesn't have the ability to actually force and dictate.
Yeah,
it can try to persuade. I think a good Christian foundation to a society would try to the people in that society would discourage people from using things like pornography and stuff like that. But that's basically where it ends, because once two wrongs don't make a right, in my opinion, as far as I can tell. If you consider pornography wrong or harmful, then it doesn't help by adding an additional immoral action, which is force, to the equation. What would be helpful is choosing not to do it, not to use it, right? What would be helpful is getting married and having kids and teaching them good values and being a good example in your community. To me, virtue and force are not compatible.
Yeah.
Virtue has to be in a state of freedom, otherwise it's not virtue. You have to choose it, be able to choose it.
But I think in a lot of cases, people left to themselves don't choose it. Because going again off sort of the pornography example, if you look at cinema in the 20s, 30s, 40s, the Catholics and the Protestants sort of made a coalition to lobby for decency laws.
Right.
So there were certain things you weren't allowed to do on camera. And then, eventually that was undermined slowly until it was in the 60s. It played a part in the whole sexual revolution happening. And look at how people used to look at the way our society is sort of like degraded, especially in that area since then, right? Like, and you know, the slippery slope fallacy. I don't know if that's necessarily a fallacy, because you go from, you know, in the 60s, people are just, you know, all the previous restraints on sexual interaction were pretty much gone. Yeah. And then you get the rise of homosexuality, and then you look in, I think it was 2015 when the states made it legal.
Oh, okay.
So look at how much it's picked up since then.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just like, oh, it's just consenting adults doing what they want in private. It's like, we now have
it's had a real effect on society.
Yeah, it's had a real effect where it's like, you have to call this person by their pronouns or you could be fined. Or there's going to be a drag queen reading storybooks in a public library. Like, you tell that to someone, you know, like 60 years ago before the sexual revolution happened, they'd be like, what?
Are you kidding me?
Here in Canada? Like, they wouldn't believe you. And it's just like, that's, like, yes, obviously we don't want to use force, but there is, like, without those sort of restraints, like, I think you can see how, like, in a matter of decades, like, the way we approach sexuality has changed, like, so radically, right?
You're completely right. And I do agree with you that, you know, once those particular restraints were off, then society did, like, you know, degrade in that sense, or we've gone in that direction. But here's the thing, you know, and this is funny because I literally just preached this past Sunday. My message was called "Real Life, Leave It to Beaver," and when you're watching this, it won't be this past Sunday. I just realized that. But the thing is, like in Leave It to Beaver times in the late 50s, you know, they had those sort of restraints, and you could have a show like that where it was teaching morality, teaching the consequences of doing wrong things. But like, that's not to say that people back then weren't doing all kinds of crazy things. They were. It just wasn't as public as it is now. Like, the thing about prohibition, for example, the prohibition of alcohol, nobody stopped drinking. You know, maybe some did, but most people just found a different way to do it. So if we get the government involved, you know, people's natures are what it is, right? It's not people's natures are not going to change. They're going to do what they want. To me, I'd rather have a society where we can see what people are like and then try to work with them on that level. And again, try to, you know, don't worry so much about other people. Worry about yourself, right? Worry about your own vices.
Yeah. And I agree to an extent, like restraints isn't about being a zero-sum game. Like, obviously, people are still going to do that sort of thing. But I think, especially with the prohibition argument there, like, I think it comes down to the fact that once you give people something, though, you can't take it back. Right? Like, because alcohol has been legal and part of human life for, like, thousands of years. And to just say you can't do it anymore, like, obviously, that's not going to work. But, like... But for example, for marijuana, like, the usage did spike when it was legalized. And whether it should be legal or not is a different question. But the usage did spike. And now that it's legal, like, you can't just make it illegal again. Like, it's not going to do anything. Right. So I think it's a slightly different principle when it comes to something that's always been taboo also being prohibited, and something that's, like, always been accepted being artificially prohibited.
But who gets to decide what is? And again, we haven't even gotten to, like, what you mean by what would the government do? Yeah. Do you mean, like, make things illegal, or do you make things just harder to do, or just, like, what exactly?
I think those two will probably go hand in
hand. Yeah. So,
but I think the thing that makes this kind of conversation tricky and saying, like, this is what should be legal and this shouldn't be, is we don't have an overarching set of beliefs we buy into anymore. Right. Because, like, you know, even, like I said, like 50, 60 years ago with the sexual revolution, pretty much everyone, like, for example, in English-speaking Canada, pretty much everybody was probably, like, Anglican. And, like, you go back before that, like, when these were colonies, like, if you're in a British colony, you're Anglican. If you're in a French colony, you're Catholic. And obviously in Europe, like, you're either Protestant or Catholic. Before the Reformation, everybody was... and it goes on and on. It's like... But once you lose a sense of, like, religious unity, it's hard to say, like, pornography should be illegal because it's sexually immoral, but, like, someone else is like, well,
not to me it
isn't, right? So I think that's what the broader issue is here. It's like, it's not like we're in the kind of, we have this sort of society now where it's like you can't really, or it's harder to, because not everyone has a homogenous set of beliefs anymore.
But I think that is the challenge. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I don't think we can have such big countries. I don't, like, this is we'll have to do another episode on this. I don't think we should have such big countries because we aren't going to all agree. You see what the Democrats are doing, trying to figure out who their nominee is going to be, and all the Trump supporters. And here in Canada, there's such division among the different political viewpoints.
Yeah,
I think we should have smaller countries so that it can be a little more unified in terms of how the society is.
Just kind of regionalize a bit more.
Yeah, regionalize more. And then, the thing is, if people want to get together in a free society, if you want to get together with a bunch of like-minded people and have a little region where you outlaw those sort of things, go ahead. But other people should be free to go and create their own society somewhere else where those things are legal. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
That's the difference between, libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism versus any other kind. In a free society, you can have a socialist little community.
Yeah.
You can have a communist community. You can have those are the same thing, I guess. But you can have a completely Christian, Puritan community, and you can have a completely hedonistic community, because nobody's saying how you should govern. As long as you're on your own property and you are with like-minded consenting people, you should be able to have your society the way you want. So, I don't know if we're going to solve everything today.
No, probably not.
But it was a great discussion, and we're going to wrap up. And so that gives you a little taste of what our political discussions might be like. We'll have some more discussions about that in future episodes. And with Passover and Easter coming up, we definitely want to talk about the atonement and the significance of the cross of Jesus and all those sort of things, and we'll do that coming up at the end of March and into April. But for now, this has been today's episode of Variologies. Thank you for listening and watching. Please subscribe and do anything that you can to help support us. We would definitely love it if you could visit my website, messianicniagara.com, and click on the donate link, and you can help us financially to help pay for the costs associated with this podcast. Thanks again for listening, and this has been Variologies. I'm Dan Calcagno.
And I'm Noah.
And we'll see you next time.